It goes beyond saying that Rolex is one of the biggest watch brands in the world. It's synonymous with success, luxury, and quality. It's safe to say it should be no surprise as to why it is so adored by watch enthusiasts and collectors alike. However, not every Rolex model has been so warmly received by users, and some of them for various reasons. In this video, we'll be talking about some of these infamous Rolex watches and the reasons nobody ever talks about them. Let's start with the Rolex Cellini. Being a top-ranking Swiss watch company at the vanguards of luxury watches, Rolex excels in producing dress watches along with fully functional timepieces for professional and sporty endeavors, and the 1960s Rolex Cellini line is no different. The Cellini line went through a bit of refurbishment in 2014, with the inclusion of some fanciful touches in the bezels and dials. The new pieces may have been a no-brainer compared to some of the older models that were complicated, such as the moon phase display, but even so, this wasn't enough to make the average Rolex buyer turn their heads, the majority of whom adore the Rolex brand for its tool watches and not so much for its dress watches. This has also affected the Cellini line in terms of value, as they don't resell for much on the pre-owned market due to its low demand. On paper, the Cellinis are characteristically impressive in design, size, and detailed, classy styling, all these being typical ingredients for a recipe of success in the watch market. So why are they so rarely spotted in public in comparison to the other lines? Well, the lack of identity and perhaps a heritage of true design may just have been one of the significant contributing factors. Rolex attempted to give this line a much more stable identity when they refreshed the line. The Cellini time, date, and dual time were initially released with conventional dial options in precious metals, but later the new models also included a 39mm non-oyster case, and essentially everything was new, right down to the hands, dials, fluted bezels, and indices, but the damage had already been done. For many other brands, this is hardly ever any issue. But when you have magnificent models in your collection that have an engaging story, getting one that doesn't just feel like bringing a cup of water into an ocean absolutely won't stand out. This then brings us to the competition. The Rolex Cellini was probably also a victim of the Rolex Sports watch's success. For the price range starting from $11,000 upwards, the Cellini was simply up against some tough competition from some similarly iconic brands, like the A Lange und Sonne, Saxonia Thin, Jaeger LeCoultre Reverso Tribute Moon, and the Glashütte Original Panamatic Lunar Steel. After a quick look at what else was out there for a similar price and some even cheaper, it's clear why the Cellini became so unpopular. Another Rolex line that seems to be so unpopular is the Rolex Milgauss. The name is derived from a combination of the French word mille, which means 1,000, and the scientific term Gauss, which is the scientific term for measuring magnetic fields. Combining this implies that the watch could withstand magnetic fields up to 1,000 Gauss. Despite all the interesting backstory, there was actually a time when the line became so underappreciated that you could ideally get your hands on a Rolex Milgauss for free. A lot of watch sellers used it as leverage or basically a bargaining chip, including it as incentives to sell the more in-demand Rolex models. Why then was it so unpopular? Rolex designed the Milgauss for engineers and scientists mainly to shield against electromagnetic fields and interference. This wasn't a niche everyone actually sought, especially given that other models like the Submariner, Daytona, and GMT were considerably gaining way more traction in comparison. While the dial may have been glowing in green and blue when fully charged, it didn't last long. It seemed to last for only around a few hours, usually not more than 3, with the blue light disappearing first and rather quickly. Another reason the Rolex Milgauss was known for getting lost in the crowd could have been the misfortune it had for arriving at the same time as some other legendary horology pieces like the Oyster Perpetual, which wasn't too dissimilar from the Milgauss, apart from the fact the latter had a magnetic shield around it. They had a similar caliber 3131 movement, and the Milgauss didn't offer any additional benefits, but somehow cost $2,000 more. The Rolex Skydweller is another line that seems to have a meh feeling to it. Rolex introduced the Skydweller in 2012 as its most technologically advanced watch in the collection. It had a dual time zone and a yearly calendar controlled by the ring command bezel, making it simple to use daily. Ever since it was introduced, the looks sparked a lot of controversy and discussion. Rolex first introduced the Skydweller in precious metals, which, paired with the 42mm size, made a statement. But when a subsequent version with a white gold bezel was produced in 2017, it made it less original. It felt like a carbon copy of the legendary Datejust, which the Skydweller took inspiration from, but probably overdid. In a nutshell, it looks like a somewhat larger Datejust 41, which also launched in 2017, with a GMT feature and a yearly calendar. Another issue that enthusiasts had with it was the dial's intricacy. The large, intrusive bezels, as well as the significant baton index indicators, were unpleasant. While technically innovative, the Skydweller didn't feel like a go-to for the common user, maybe due to the fact that it looked so much like the Datejust, especially when it was chunkier. Next is the Rolex Air King. The Rolex Air King was released in the 1940s for army pilots, and for quite a long time, it was hailed as one of the simplest Rolexes ever made. It has no date, an oyster case, no screw-down crown, and a chronometer movement, basically every ingredient that makes up a Rolex. It was termed the Rolex for the original fans, but it was discontinued in 2014. Shortly after, there came a rejuvenated Air King in a much more extroverted style and a nice background story, and directly in reference to the Air King 116900, which was revealed at Baselworld in 2016. It was a 40mm version as a standalone line with a black dial on an oyster bracelet, which was one of the things that every fan seemed to have wanted, and a tool watch coming from a tool environment, but boom. First problem, a lot of people actually couldn't get over the yellow crown with the corporate green Rolex look. Another reason why people seem to talk less about the Air King is that it was unpopular due to its bulkiness. It was too big and didn't sit right on the wrist for the average user. Given its niche for pilot pleasure, the dial of a tool watch had to be quite crowded in terms of design, something that did not appeal to the broader public. The Rolex Yacht-Master is another watch that doesn't get a lot of love from a wide number of users. It was one of the later introduced models from Rolex. After making its debut in 1992, designed for boating or time races, it did contain basically everything that people love about a Rolex: a robust case, excellent water resistance, a date magnifier, and an oyster bracelet with the oyster lock folding clasp. Just to mention, it was released in 40mm and 42mm versions. However, this line wasn't particularly getting lots of interest from mainstream watch collectors. One of the problems was that it was considered too expensive, especially since it came in a rubber strap. It also felt like a watch with a bit of misplaced identity, as a lot of people couldn't tell if it was a dressier watch or a sports watch. The mechanism of the Rolex Submariner and the Rolex Yacht-Master is exceptionally similar in terms of appearance. The design of the bezel was also a bit hated, and it seemed a trifle too close to the Submariner, which was even cheaper, more beloved, and better appearing while performing distinct objectives. It goes without saying that a lot of these models, despite being unpopular, still have a lot of fans and wearers till this day. But alas, what do you think Rolex might have done differently to make these models stand out more? Also, what other models are left out in this video that you feel are largely unpopular?